Hello there, and welcome to the Construction Revolution podcast. My name is Eric E., and here in the show we explore the latest trends, technologies, people, and organizations that are revolutionizing or disrupting the construction industry and changing what the industry will look like tomorrow. Today in the show, I speak with Nathan Medcalf, who is based out of Burlington, Ontario. Nathan provides content creation, communications, marketing, and media relations services to international original equipment manufacturers, construction technology companies, construction-related trade shows, and professional associations, and pretty well anyone else in the construction industry through his company, Nathan Medcalf Freelance. Through his company, Nathan Medcalf Equipment, Nathan sells and promotes the Giatec Comicat 140 milling machine, the Garbalizer line of mini recyclers, and the Timbin TC2 dry vacuum excavator attachment. He's also the owner of Nathan Medcalf Media, whose digital properties include Heavy Equipment Junkies, for fans of heavy equipment, and Construction News, which comments on the construction news industry via an animated YouTube show. So without further ado, let's hear from Nathan just after this. So Nathan, when it comes to staying on the cutting edge of construction news and trends, where do you get your information?
Well, I get a lot of my information directly from the sources themselves, but most people don't have that kind of access. So for the general public, I recommend Daily Commercial News and Journal of Commerce for Canadian construction news, Construction Die for U.S. construction news, Heavy Equipment Guide, Construction Equipment Guide, Compact Equipment, and Equipment World for heavy equipment news. And two of my favorite shows are the James Benham's Contech Crew and Wayne Grayson's The Dirt.
Oh, that's great. We just had one of our co-founders, Ali, on the Contech Crew, one of their last episodes.
Yeah, I watched this show quite a bit. Really great guy. I met him in person. I've interviewed him for a couple of articles. So him and Wayne Grayson, who comes out of the equipment world, he does a really good video in-depth discussion of equipment and other trends in the construction industry. So I recommend those two.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So one thing I think is kind of topical that I'm sure everyone is talking about, but the last year, it's been very disruptive to both the construction industry and especially those in the event space. So how do you see the industry adapting to a digital format?
Yeah, well, let's just say we just passed the 1-year anniversary of ConExpo ConAg, which was the last largest construction equipment trade show in North America to be a live event. Since then, there have been no live events in the construction trade show industry. And at that show, it was amazing to see how the mood changed in less than a week. At the beginning of the show, equipment sales people that I was talking to were excited about all the equipment they're going to sell that year. And by the end of the show, they were wondering if they could keep their jobs.
Wow.
So just in the change over the course of that one show because of the timing of it. Since then, I also worked for another trade show. I worked for ConExpo, and now I also work for Canadian Concrete Expo. And on that side, I am involved on the exhibition part of the show. And we decided in April that there was a very good chance that we were not going to have a show in 2021. And we were right. It was not going to be possible. So we investigated alternatives to doing a physical in-person show. And in May of that year, I attended an event called Evolve, put on by Swapcard and a number of digital platform providers. And I find that platform and the best practices that were talked about at that event has become the blueprint for some of the better trade shows, digital trade shows that have happened since then, like Landscape Ontario, the Building Show, and Canada's Outdoor Farm Show. So they have adapted. Now they can do some more work in advance, and they're relying a lot more on video. So, anyone who's doing video is now getting tapped for create on-demand events at these live events. In the beginning, though, I saw that the digital events were really poorly constructed.
Mm-hmm.
It was like what people were calling a trade show were 4 one-hour workshops that were poorly moderated. But now it's shifted into something a little more dynamic, where through Swapcard or other similar platforms, you have on-demand events, live events, networking, an exhibit space. So you have everything except for the in-person component to trade shows. However, and spec up, this technology that has allowed this has been here for years. It just took the pandemic to get people to use it. And I was curious to see how much this would go back to normal once the pandemic is over, we have a vaccine, and how much of these shows will become like hybrid shows or a mixture of digital and in person. And I think a lot of people are pretty much just going to go back to in person. And a lot of these technologies that we're learning and using this year will be largely put aside in the future.
I think there's a huge appetite to getting back to normal, or getting back to seeing people and going to conferences.
Yeah, there's a definite emotional response. It's like, people say, why walk if you can take a car, right? So similar thing here, why meet online if you can meet in person? I myself am looking forward to attending more events digitally than in person because of the cost savings.
Yeah, it's nice not to have to travel and stay in hotels and things like that if you can get all the same content.
Yes, exactly. So I do find the networking isn't quite the same because you don't run into people the way you did. But I find I get more cold calls at these events because, you walk around the show, you have a name tag, and people aren't really going to approach you. But now with these live events or these digital events, everyone gets to put up a profile, sort of like Facebook, and then people just go through your profiles and see what's available for them to help them. And people come across me and say, hey, he has services I could use. So I find I get more cold calls, and I have to do less of the, hey, this is me, this is my sales pitch. So
yeah, you don't know if that person's interested in your services at that point, where when they're searching through, it's kind of a better way to match make, I guess.
Yeah, so there are benefits there.
So if things do get back to normal, or even if they stay digital for 2021 and maybe even 2022, what trade shows or digital events are on your radar that people should pay attention to stay on top of what's going on in the industry?
Yeah. This is funny. I do enjoy trade shows for a number of reasons, but not necessarily to stay on top of industry developments. And in part that's because due to the sheer volume and speed that digital media can communicate information, I wouldn't recommend waiting for a trade show to find out latest industry developments. There's just so much media information that I think this is becoming your first contact or point of experience or knowledge point when it comes to a new technology or a machine. That, trade shows are really more so after you've read about it in the magazine, you go to the show and you get to kick the tires and talk to the product experts. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's what I find is trade shows are really losing their market on being a communication tool or a marketing tool for the latest in industry developments, because there's just so much digital media out there that's running 24/7.
Yeah, I know it is hard to parse all that digital media. I guess one value I always found with trade shows is hearing from those experts on things that they might not necessarily publish anywhere, or their use cases and things like that. So that's one thing I find beneficial with trade shows most of the time. Now, I know one area that you specialize in that I actually have very little knowledge of is the heavy equipment space. I would love to learn more about any interesting developments going on in that space.
Yeah, so the heavy equipment space is really moving from a mechanical space to a digital space. And that is because there are very finite limits to the physical world. Your bucket can only fill so much, the boom can only move so fast, material can only be so light. We've reached the limitations very quickly. And now changes on the mechanical side are very incremental. But changes to the digital side are happening exponentially, and the benefits that they are paying is much greater than any mechanical change. So, for example, automation is a digital change that's affecting the mechanical space. It increases speed, improves safety and precision, decreases the number of people needed to perform a task, and improves operator performance, and other benefits depending on application. So automation is basically, a lot of times you need a GPS, you need some kind of business information model, some kind of digital model, and coding. That's all you need for automation. Right? So that's one of the biggest things that's changing. And then the second biggest thing is fuel efficiency and alternative power sources. Manufacturers are in large part moving to electric, and it's not just a be green, feel good movement. There's a lot of dollars and cents to it. More than 10 years ago, I remember asking someone from a diesel engine company about the implementation of EVs, electric vehicles, in the construction industry. And he said the machines wouldn't work, meaning they just wouldn't have the power capacity to match the machine's performance capabilities. But now, construction manufacturers are coming up with machines, electric machines, that have greater power capacities than their diesel counterparts. The only shortcoming is that power only lasts for so long, and you have to spend a lot of time recharging them. So that's the other thing. And if I were to pick a third thing, and it's not even so much more mechanical, it's more like the relationship between owners and the equipment. Is this sort of changeover from sort of you just buy a machine and then you deal with all the maintenance as it happens, now taking a proactive maintenance plan where the dealer has now become basically your indoor mechanic or fleet maintenance manager. And the dealers and the manufacturers are tracking what you're doing with your equipment in order to better service you. So they can tell you ahead of time when you're going to need new filters, when there's an error diagnostic coming up. And they'll take care of that part of it for you, and that is all worked in sort of a monthly plan that's distributed over the financing of the machine. So those are three of the biggest changes of that to the construction equipment.
I wish my car dealer could do something similar.
Yeah, actually, they can, and you could get like basically a proactive maintenance plan for your car. And now a lot of them aren't equipped with sort of that same GPS and a lot of remote diagnostics that construction equipment is. And I think that part of that is because construction equipment works out in the field, far away from anywhere where you can repair it. You're driving your car, you're in a city, chances are you're not far, with more than 10 kilometers away from somewhere you can fix your car.
So if there's a breakdown in the field, do the dealers go out there and fix it, or do they somehow bring the equipment back to them to fix it?
Depends on the nature of the repair. If you blow out an entire engine, you have to bring it back to the shop and lift it up and get under the machine. It means getting under the machine at all. It could mean having to hoist it. A lot of minor repairs, if you can do it from a service tech truck, then that's obviously the better scenario. The best scenario is try to avoid any unplanned downtime at all. So you basically do all your maintenance, and there's a lot of data that goes into anticipating when something will break, and so try to schedule replacing that part before it breaks. That way, if you're doing it as a planned activity, you know you don't need that machine in the field at that moment, and it's not causing you any extra downtime for any of your other machines or people.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see where planning ahead for that would be ideal, but like you said, sometimes things just go wrong and you can't plan.
Some things go wrong in the field, right?
So outside the heavy equipment space, what technology have you seen that's either in the market now or coming out soon that you're most excited for?
It's probably be virtual reality and also mixed reality. It's going to have a great impact on how construction is carried out. I've used the HoloLens prior to it being the company going under, and it was amazing how with my eyes I could look at choices on a screen and select them, and then it would show me sort of a 3D image of, say, what's supposed to be behind a wall, which is great because if you're a plumber, for example, and you want to install your plumbing, but you don't want to get in the way of the electrician or where their wires are going to be. You don't know exactly how it's going to get wired, but with something like a virtual reality or mixed reality headset, you can see where everything is intended to go, and you're not stepping on anyone's toes. And of course, virtual reality is something that in the non-construction space is getting a big uptick in things like entertainment, manufacturing, product design, and the medical industry. So
yeah, it's always interesting to see when there's new developments in other fields how quickly they can find applications in more like fields like construction and things like that.
Yeah, I think construction used to be an afterthought for a lot of applications, but now construction is really, really beginning to embrace digital technology in a revolutionary way.
I've heard people say that the construction industry traditionally is very slow to adapt to new technologies, but the short time I've been part of it, it does seem like there is a lot of different products and a rapid sea of change coming towards us so quickly. Yeah, because I know it seems like there's a lot of entrepreneurs working in this space on new technology that can benefit the industry. What role do you think, I guess, construction media plays in helping them get exposure, and how do they use it to their benefit?
Well, magazines alert people to what is new and what is important, and how something can benefit you. They're often the first to tell you about something. They can aggregate stories into writings about trends, and they can personalize technology by highlighting end user experiences. If you want to work with construction media, the first thing you should do is identify which media covers topics that are in line with your business. So these magazines will be the best options for reaching your audience, your potential customers. Then ask the selected publications for their media kits, and this contains their advertising rates and editorial calendar. Now, the editorial calendar is an antiquated and sometimes arbitrary selection of what the magazine will feature when, but it's very handy for getting into the magazine. For example, when I was the editor of Equipment Journal, if submitted content matched the feature of that particular issue, it got published more than 80% of the time. However, if it didn't match the feature, it got published less than 20% of the time. So, going and make sure your content matches these features of these magazines is very crucial to getting published. Also, I should say that magazines are a lot like free video games with in-app purchases. So you can play for free, but to get the full experience, you need to pay. And this is what I mean by that. So when it comes to magazines and any construction media digital publication, content submitted by a non-advertiser, unless your story is really great and pertinent, you will get published less frequently, get less favorable placement, it will take up less space than content submitted by advertisers. So, as a whole, generally that's the rule for any magazine. And so as a non-advertiser, you can expect that your story might end up as a half page on page 13 with one small photo instead of page 3 with 3 large photos, and it's a full page story. But, just work for that. Also, magazines are great for brand awareness and lead generation, but don't be fooled into thinking that an ad or a half-page ad complete with a story in the same issue is going to sell anything for you. An equipment dealer once told me that he sold a machine after a contractor had come and visit him at a trade show. And he said that the contractor had said the only reason he came to that trade show was to see this machine that he had read about in the equipment journal. So the story was enough to motivate him to spend a few $1,000s to take him and some of his crew to a trade show stateside, but it certainly wasn't enough to get him to spend the tens of thousands of dollars to buy the machine outright just by reading it. So when you're submitting content, remember that in your call to action, they're probably not going to buy something because you wrote a really great article, but they will take certain actions like follow up with a product expert. So write that into your content. And then lastly, always submit your content at least 30 days ahead of the publishing date, because editors work building these magazines months in advance. And always meet the deadlines given by the editor. Otherwise, good luck ever getting your stuff published again.
I think that's probably a good piece of advice for any
type of work, but definitely you go through an editor's. We have what we have like a false deadline, and we'll even have a double false deadline. And if you burn through that double false deadline, expect hate mail or something, because because the editor has saved space for you. They don't promise that they'll publish something of yours without seeing it, right? Obviously. But they'll say, okay, you have this story, it sounds really great, I'll save half a page for you. And if you don't come through, that means they have to scramble to fill that half page at the last minute. So, exactly. Always be on time with your editors.
I like the idea of false and double false deadlines. I might actually start using that.
It's helpful because people will burn through your false deadline, and then you're like, oh, you know what? I have to say that was a false deadline that I give people. The actual bare deadline is this, and of course it's not, because you don't ever want to give away your final deadline, because then you're really up the creek without a paddle if someone doesn't come through with you.
Yeah. If people know they have more time to do something, they'll take more time to do it, or they won't start it.
Sure.
And I'm the same way. I'm guilty of that as well. So, Nathan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. But before I let you go, I know that you are a pretty in-demand professional. Is there a best place that any listeners could contact you if they want to get a hold of you?
Probably, I'm very active on LinkedIn. Also, Nathan at nathanmedcalffreelance.com is my email. Feel free to send me any inquiries.
All right. Thank you so much, Nathan.
Thank you, Eric. Have a good day.